we want to welcome to the program Wendy Ann Clark. Hello, Wendy Ann. How's everything?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you once again for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the program. So let's get right to it. Before we begin with, again, thank you. Your upbringing, you grew up in Canada, particularly you grew up in the Toronto area. Just give our audience just a little bit about your upbringing and how it made you into the person that you are today.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Toronto. Anybody who's been to Toronto knows that Toronto is a city. Actually, Canada is a country of immigrants, and Toronto is probably one of the most diverse cities in the world. And so my parents are from Jamaica, and so they immigrated to Canada. So I was born and raised in a very Caribbean Canadian household, and always did well in school, and developed a passion for track and field at a very young age. And so I was always the girl running. That's why my Instagram handle is Wendy Ann Runs, because it's just such a big part of my life. And towards the end of high school, I started to take track and field a little bit more seriously, as I had some opportunities to go to the States. I was being looked at by some recruiters and that sort of thing, and I wasn't in a track club or anything like that. And so I decided that, this is something that I really want to focus on. Long story short, I ended up staying in Canada. I attended York University, where I studied psychology and competed on the track and field team. In Canada, the audience might not know, but we have the CIS, which is similar to the NCAA system. And so in the CIS, I had a very, very respectable career, and I also I won a CIS medal and that sort of thing. So it was great. And when I was making the transition towards the end of my academic career, I developed an injury. So I had an overuse injury. I'd torn a tendon in my ankle, which was absolutely devastating. I wasn't able to finish my last year. And that process set me on quite a years-long journey that ultimately led me into sports journalism. So in 2015, when Toronto was preparing for the Pan Am Games, I was recruited by someone in track and field to be a spotter working for the host broadcaster, which is CBC. That would be the equivalent to, let's say, NBC in the United States. And that opened up my eyes to sport in just a different way. It was, for me, the culmination of so many things that I had a passion for, track and field. I was also somebody who was doing a lot of acting, a lot of stage managing, that sort of thing. So it was the production of sport as well. And it was also storytelling, which is something that I was very, very passionate about as well. So I got really excited, and I thought, wow, I found my thing. I found my groove finally. And so just talking to and I also noticed, I should mention that I was the only Black person on the team, of the team, about 60, 70 people. And so I talked to people, and they were very encouraging, so I decided that this is a path that I was going to go down. So I enrolled in journalism school immediately after, so within days of finishing those the Pan Am Games, and I attended Centennial College, which is a sports journalism program. That's an excellent program, and that is really what led me into the industry. So in 2016, I had the opportunity to work as part of the production team in Toronto covering the Rio Olympics. And then following the Rio Olympics, of course, we have the Paralympics that occur sort of alongside the Olympics, so immediately afterwards. And I had the opportunity to travel to Rio and cover the Paralympics from there, which was an incredible experience, especially having that happen so early in my career. So it was part of a joint program between the Canadian Paralympic Committee and CBC Sports. And so writing and just having an opportunity to share the stories that I was seeing, and in the sports that I love, so I was covering track and field. So it was just an incredible experience for me. And then after that, since then I've been able to cover the Pyeongchang Olympics in 2018 as part of the team working in Toronto as a producer and writer. I have also worked with a number of governing bodies, including the IAAF, which is now World Athletics, covering the World Championships. I worked with Tennis Canada, covering Rogers Cup, which is the Canadian Open here. I've also worked with the Indigenous Sport and Wellness Council of Ontario. So lots of different outlets. So yeah, that's sort of my journey.
Wow, that's awesome. And you've done a lot of great things so far, and you're continuing to do big things. I want to get back to your upbringing, specifically Toronto. As we know, Toronto is one of the great cities in all of the world. It's known for its diversity, and as you mentioned, it's a city of immigrants. I want to know, you growing up in Toronto, was track and field big in Toronto, or was it? Or we know that not just Toronto, but we know that Canada is known as being traditionally a hockey town, and as of recent with the Toronto Raptors. But when you coming up, was track and field big in Toronto?
It's a good question. So track and field has an incredible legacy, particularly that came up in the 80s with the Ben Johnson era. I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Johnson, but he was a legend, or still is a legend, and he won the 100-meter the 1980. Okay, the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, and so that was a huge deal. And then, of course, we know what happened after that, and there's a wonderful documentary called 979, I believe it's called, that goes into that in detail, and does an excellent job that I highly recommend. I believe it's an ESPN 30 for 30 doc. But and then we have, of course, in 1996 with Donovan Bailey and the Canadian team winning the 4x100 meters. So there is a legacy of track and field in Toronto. It's not the same as, say, in Europe, where they the society and the culture really supports, and the European circuit, you'll have the stands will be packed with fans and that sort of thing. In Toronto, it's you'll see more family and family members of athletes in the stands and that sort of thing. So it doesn't necessarily have the bank and the cultural currency in the same way that it has in Europe, but track and field is a sport that arises to the top every 4 years, right, during the Olympic Games. So it's very popular in Toronto. Yes, it is quite popular, but it's really every 4 years that the city really pays attention. Pays attention to our athletes. We of course we have Aubrey McGrath now, and Aaron Brown, and so many others. So it's a yes and no. Of course, hockey is the big sport in Canada, and now basketball. In a lot of ways, it can be argued that Toronto is more of a basketball city now than it even is a hockey city, although the landscape of Canada as a nation is still very much hockey dominant.
Okay, well, let's stay with track and field for a moment. You mentioned that it's big, but it's not big, and again, it's more of like a family thing, because you mentioned about family members and friends being supportive. Was it big? Was it a recruiting hotbed in track and field in Toronto during your time running, or as it is now, or is it still pretty stable?
Yeah. So the thing is, for a long time, if you were very serious about track and field, and even now it's still the same in a lot of ways, you felt like you had to go to the States. And so recruiters are very aware of the Toronto landscape, and so they come here and they definitely work with athletes, and even the club that I work with, Flying Angels Track Club, there's relationships with different schools and that sort of thing. So people are recruiters of schools are very, very aware of Toronto. What's happened, what's interesting in more recent years, is the infrastructure in Canada has changed so that athletes have more of an opportunity to stay here and still feel supported. So athletes go really because of financial reasons. They've invested, how many years, 10 years usually by that time, of their life in this sport, and the objective is to get their school paid for, and there was really no opportunity for that. Even when I stayed here, but even when I was in school, it wasn't until my last 2 years of school that I was able to get any kind of bursary or any of my tuition covered. And even then, it was about 80% of my tuition, and I still had to eat, I still had to live, you know, so it wasn't like I still had to work part-time and that sort of thing. So athletes now, the top athletes that qualify for karting, definitely have the opportunity to stay. One of the things that happens when track and field athletes go to the States is that when they're in Toronto, you know, you're a 100-meter sprinter, you're 18 years old, and you run, let's say, 10.4. You're a superstar here. You're getting written up in the paper. You're in the Toronto Star. You're, you know, athlete of the week in different local newspapers. But then you go down south, and you know, you're one of you know, 100, 200 guys that are running 10.2, 10.3, or 10.4. You know, and it's that are your age, and so it can be really psychologically difficult for athletes because of the population in Canada is so much smaller in Canada, so as compared to the United States. So they're not used to having all of the competition, and sometimes that the shock of just being another athlete running 10.2 or 10.3 can be so difficult for that athlete to overcome that they lose interest in the sport, and we lose them to, you know, they graduate school, and, you know, they go on and we don't see them again, and it's happened with so many athletes over the years. So developing a system to keep athletes in Canada in the same way, you know, Jamaicans have, you know, developed a system that keep athletes in Jamaica, and so they're able to train in Jamaica and that sort of thing. This doesn't negate the fact that, you know, many athletes still are going to the States and all of that, which is fine. But keeping them from being burnt out, from being psychologically, you know, impacted, and all of that has been key to the development of the program. And we've seen the greatest resurgence in Canadian track and field and the success of our athletes on the global scale. A lot of that has to do with those changes that have been made in the system that are keeping more athletes in Canada.
All right, rightfully so. And let's stay in Canada for a moment. Now, I'm looking at some of your educational background. You correct me if I'm wrong, you earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from York University, and York is one of the top schools, not just in Toronto, but in Canada as well. And as you mentioned earlier, you were on the track team at York. Now, what events did you specialize in during your time at York?
Yeah, so Canadian track and field is quite different from American track and field in that we don't have an outdoor season. So okay. We're a winter nation, and so the school year goes until at the end of March. I think you have a few exams maybe early in April, and then you're done for the year. So the weather hasn't even gotten, you know, truly warm yet before our school year is over. So the peak times of our season is like late February into March. So we use an indoor track, and the indoor track is 200 meters. And so our events range from 60 meters. So we have the 60 meter, the 300 meter, the 600 meter, 1,000. Then we go up to like the longer distances. And then we have a 4x2 relay and a 4x400 meter relay. So I had quite a long range. My true distance would be like the 400 meter outdoor, but for university track, that would be the 300. So the 400 meter runners would be running the 300, which is kind of run like a long 200. And then the 800 meter runners would kind of run the 600, or, you know what I mean? So a 400 meter runner would run 300 and 600. So that's what I competed in, but mostly 300. But because of my range, I was used in events ranging from 60 meters to 800.
Okay, so you definitely did a wide range of events at your time at York University, but you mentioned you specialized, your main event was the 300 meters, so you did big things at York. The most important thing was earning your college education there, and again, you mentioned about that gruesome injury that you had, but nevertheless, you turned that negative into a positive, and you segued into a journalism career, which I want to talk about. You did some freelance writing for outlets such as the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, also Athletics Ontario, Tennis Canada, Toronto Observer, and Yahoo Sports Canada. Now, we know that the CBC, I mean, I'm American, but I've been following up on some of the outlets, not just in other parts of North America, but around the world. And I see the CBC is kind of like the big network, one of the big networks in Canada. How did you begin your association with the CBC?
I was a staff. So that's where I did my internship originally, when I was in school. So in 2016, when I did journalism school, that's where I chose to do my internship. However, I was hired there before I even started my internship. That was during the 2016 Olympics. They hire a lot of students to help with some of the production aspects. So that was my first introduction to the newsroom and the office space at CBC. And so that was, of course, exciting to grow up. It's, like I said, CBC is kind of like NBC or the BBC would be the equivalent overseas. So it was very exciting for me, and I had such a great experience. And of course, my knowledge, most of the people that work in aren't necessarily athletes, and so I came with a lot of knowledge, particularly of track and field. And I've also, I haven't mentioned, but I've boxed a little bit as well. So it was great. Like, you know, on a regular during a regular Olympics, I'd be home watching the Olympics, you know, all day and PVRing events and that sort of thing. So being able to get paid to do that was like a dream come true. And so it was a lot of fun. And then from there, as I mentioned, I traveled to Rio, and I was brought on as a part of a team of 5 that was working directly with the Canadian Paralympic Committee in partnership with CBC Sports. And so, as you may be aware, the Paralympic movement has continued to grow since it began many years ago, and it still doesn't get as much coverage as the Olympic Games. So for me, it was just an exciting opportunity to shed light on these incredible athletes that are working and putting in all the hours and all the training and the blood, sweat, and tears, and are doing and performing so well. And so I was working with CBC and writing some really, really cool stories. One of the highlights of that experience for me in terms of the stories that I was writing for CBC was something actually very interesting happening. In the 1,500 meter, it's a very strategic race, and the athletes went out and ran the race extremely slow. So the pace of the 1,500 meter, which is normally almost a sprint at the highest level, was extremely pedestrian compared to a regular 1,500 meter at that level. And so the final time of the race, and this is in the Olympic final, was slower than one of the visually impaired races in the time in the 1,500 at the visually impaired 1,500 at the Paralympics was faster than the Olympic 1,500 time. And so that was, you know, huge news across the world, and people were reporting that was this huge breakthrough in Paralympic sport. And so for the athletes, though, it was incredibly insulting that was being said. So they were like, this is not this huge breakthrough in Paralympic sport. Like, the reason why the Olympic race was slower is because they were strategic, but those athletes are able to run much faster. So I think that sometimes with these movements, people think that they're helping athletes and helping the movement by saying that this is a breakthrough when it's not a breakthrough. And so the athletes were quite upset. They said, you know what, you're not telling our stories in the way that they need to be told. We have athletes that are visually impaired, that have disabilities, that are doing incredible things in their own right. There's no need to compare them to, you know, the what we know as the regular Olympics. And so I had the opportunity to talk to some of the athletes, the Canadian athletes, and tell that story and sort of quell the talk about this just ridiculous breakthrough in sport. And so as a young journalist, that was, my first gig over in South America at a big games like the Paralympic Games, being able to tell a story like that kind of quelled all of this media attention that this race was getting was really, really a big moment for me. So that was part of my introduction to the sport. And so after that, I was hired with CBC as they were preparing to go into Pyeongchang. And so I just began working with the team. I was doing social stuff, and I was writing as well. So that began sort of my relationship with them.
Wow, that's definitely a lot that you've gone through, especially in the early stages of your career. I want to stay with covering the Paralympics and covering Rio de Janeiro. We know Rio is a dynamic city. It's a fantastic city. It's colorful and it's dynamic, and the people are outstanding. When you went there, before you got your assignment to cover the Paralympics for the CBC, did you have an opportunity, did you and your staff members have an opportunity to go see the city and visit the city before you guys got into the business of it and covering the Paralympics?
Yeah, we did. So not a lot of time. I would say, I'm trying to remember, but I think it was about the first 4 days that we were there, we kind of had the opportunity to go see some of the sites. So of course we saw, the Christ the Redeemer statue, and we went to Sugarloaf Mountain and that sort of thing. And I remember when we were on our way to the Canadian consulate, we were, passing by the beach in Rio, and so we were able to get off our bus or whatever was transporting us and put our feet in the sand as we're all in these collared shirts and long slacks, dressed to see the Canadian consulate and kind of get back on the bus. So we did have a little bit of opportunity to go see some things, but I mean, with the breadth of experiences that Rio has to offer, I definitely didn't get to see much. And once the game started, literally I could have been anywhere in the world because I saw so little of the actual city. It was really just the indoor of the stadium at that point. And but for me, what became a really special time was my drive-in on the bus to the stadium every morning. So I was usually by myself, and I would just have this opportunity to, before I got into the stadium where I couldn't see, the air or the landscape in Rio, I would just, stare out the window and just look at the mountains and look at the people and look at the communities and all of that, and just look at the favelas. And it was my time where I was able to recharge and take in the experience and, talk to God about the day and all of that kind of stuff. So it was really a beautiful time. I felt like I didn't get to see a lot of Rio, but a piece of Rio definitely came back home to Toronto with me, just because I had those wonderful experiences in the first 4 days, but also that quiet time that I had on the bus coming in every morning.
Well, that's awesome to hear. And let's stay with Rio again for a moment. How did you guys prepare for the Zika virus pandemic? Were you given any type of information from the company or from someone at the Olympic Village, just kind of giving you guys an insight on how to prepare for the Zika virus? What was the preparation like for that?
Mm-hmm. So it seems like with every Olympics, there's some sort of, anxiety about a virus or some sort of environmental issue that threatens to stop the games. It was very interesting for us, the team of 5 that I was a part of, because we were connected to 3 institutions. So we were connected to our school, which was Centennial College. We were also connected to the Canadian Paralympic Committee, and we were also connected to CBC. So CBC we were more just sending stories to them, so they weren't the ones that were sort of taking care of us and ensuring our safety. But once I don't remember the Zika virus being a huge issue. I know that we had, it was transferred by mosquitoes, right? So we had lots of insect repellent and that sort of thing. And one of the things that we signed was that, or we had to make sure that we weren't planning to, as a woman, you weren't planning to have a child within 2 years of the games. So, I mean, I was the only woman on my team, but I felt very confident in the clear with no, prospects for a husband on the visible horizon. So I was okay. Even I don't remember getting any mosquito bites or even being afraid of it. So I think more of the anxiety happened, as is often the case before when you're going in. But once you get there and you see that life is going on and people are there and you've got people working and people are well, then it wasn't that much of a concern. And I think part of that was just because the Zika virus was really impacting pregnant women that were having children. So if that wasn't something that was an issue or a concern, then at least for a couple of years, you felt like you were okay.
All right, and definitely you guys were okay because you're able to do your job and do it very well in covering the Paralympics. And let's talk about another Olympic Games that you did. And you mentioned Pyeongchang, which is in South Korea. What was that experience like?
So it was good. So I covered those games from Toronto, so I was part of the Toronto team. So how the Olympics work is that you have a team that stays in the city. So like even for NBC Sports or whatever, they would have a team that's in wherever NBC Sports headquarters is, and they would have a team that goes down. So I was part of the team that was in Toronto, and it was a great experience because I'd worked for CBC before and did writing for them and did the Paralympics, as I mentioned, but this was my first time like in the newsroom as a part of this team covering, doing live coverage of the games. So it was really exciting. It was really, the energy in the CBC building is really nice when you're covering an Olympics. There's so many people in the building. It becomes more diverse. And you meet a lot of new people and that sort of thing. During, the regular times outside of the Olympics, it's a little bit different there, but during the Olympics, it's absolutely, it's quite fun, and the energy is just electric because things are happening live. And also, what I loved is that I was able to write some pieces for the games that were happening. So it was fun because when I covered Rio, I wasn't writing. I was part of a production team working on clipping videos and that sort of thing. So being part of the news team was just wonderful. And I was also doing social stuff and that sort of thing. So with everything being so high profile and to the minute, to the second, what you put out, hundreds of thousands of people across Canada are taking in your content. It was just a wonderful experience for me. Intense and grueling, of course, because you don't have any days off throughout, I think, the 21 days of the Olympics. But it was an absolutely tremendous experience.
Now, we know Toronto has become a basketball city, so I've got to ask you this. DeMar DeRozan was well loved in that city for a number of years. He was traded. Out goes DeMar. In comes Kawhi Leonard. We know what the end result was, and that Kawhi and his team brings home the championship. So I'm going to ask you a two-part question. First question is, what were your thoughts when DeMar was traded? And the second question is, how did you feel about Kawhi coming in and helping the Raptors win the title?
That's a great question. So when DeMar was traded, it was heartbreaking in a lot of ways. And I say this, as journalists, we're, supposed to be very, very neutral. But it was heartbreaking for me because I could relate to his experience. It wasn't so much, and I think this, I could speak for a lot of Torontonians on this, that it wasn't so much that, he was traded, because, this is sport. We know that things like that happen. He was a beloved, fixture in Toronto basketball. But it was the way that it was done, and he was hurt, and he felt like he was blindsided. And so I remember he had posted something on his Instagram stories, and just expressing his disappointment in the way things were done. He didn't have any warning, and so for me, it brought back a lot of was kind of triggering, just thinking about some of the places that I've worked with. And sometimes you labor on behalf of an organization and you think that you're going to get something from them in return, and you don't. And it can just leave a bitter taste in your mouth. And so it was a reminder to me that, when you put in the work, do it. Like, I'm a person of faith, and then do it unto God, just do your best, do it to honor your family, do it to do a good job, but don't do it expecting that, whatever organization that you're working for is going to, give you, or to take care of you. And I've seen so many athletes, and myself as an athlete, friends that I've had that fell into that trap, just thinking that I was going to be taken care of because this, and then they get an injury, and they realize that they're not going to be taken care of. So it's a sad and a cruel part of sport, but it's a part of sport, and it was just a reminder for me. So and I think a lot of people, right, in that time, obviously getting a top player like Kawhi Leonard didn't hurt anybody, his feelings, when we found that was happening. It was, I think, for most people in Toronto and for myself, it was just sort of like, okay, let's wait and see how this goes. Like, there's a lot of potential here for us to do something really special. And also the track record of Masai Ujiri, who's just been incredible. He just shown himself an incredible leader over the years as he's rose through the ranks in the Raptors organization. And you just kind of had to trust it. You just kind of had to wait and see how this played out. And of course, we had, really the perfect outcome. So not much to complain about there. I can't remember the second part of your question. Did I answer it?
Yeah, you did. The second part of the question was just basically just what were your feelings with Kawhi coming to Toronto and helping the Raptors win the title?
Yeah, so it was definitely at that point when we knew that Kawhi was coming and things were solidified, and he did the press conference. It was a very exciting time, It was so. I think the best way to describe that period was bittersweet, So I think for the Toronto fans, they felt like they were losing, a fixture in Toronto basketball and a person that built us to a certain level and a certain level of notoriety and clout, especially, when we were getting, called, the Raptor was being called Barney and Toronto and Canada, Canadian basketball was somewhat ridiculed, within the NBA and to gain the street cred that we had, Vince Carter and coming up through the years, it was incredible what DeMar did for us and the level that he brought us to. And we knew that a franchise player like Kawhi is somebody that could really, really take us to the next level. And so it was exciting. It was exciting, although it was a little heartbreaking. It was exciting, and obviously we saw how that played out.
Yeah, it played out very well. Of course, the end result was the title beating the Golden State Warriors. So we transition now into something that you've done, something that you've created, and that's a YouTube channel that you have called Color Commentary, which is dedicated to athletes and highlighting their fight for social change, social justice and change, and also things that have gotten your attention. So just let our audience know just dig deep into what Color Commentary is all about and what your message is for your YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. So Color Commentary for me was birthed out of a desire to hear certain stories be told. I'm very much, I love explanatory journalism. I know like Vox Media and different outlets are really good with doing them. Because sport is this incredible entity that we have that brings people from across the world together. I felt very strongly that if we talk about race and social justice within this context, it would enable people to hear and to listen and to understand and be more inclined to try to understand what's going on, because maybe sport being maybe seen as a less political space people would be able to think more with their hearts and not their heads, if that makes sense. And so for me, it was also an opportunity to build my voice as a journalist. I think in Canada, if you're a journalist that talks about race, you have company. William C. Roden is one of my favorite journalists and wrote $40 Million Slaves, and there's been so many others in the United States that talk about race on a regular basis. But in Canada, there's not a lot of that. And so the type of social justice and race discussions that I wanted to have, it was twofold. So I didn't feel it was necessarily something that I was seeing, and I also felt like I wanted to build my repertoire, develop my confidence in my voice on these subjects, and kind of really carve out what I see this color commentary thing becoming. So I've done a number of episodes to date, and been able to talk about a lot of very, very interesting things, and all of the things on race. I've been able to talk about allyship through the Peter Norman story, and that was Peter Norman was the silver medalist at the 1968 Olympics. He was from Australia, and he was on the podium with Tommy Smith and John Collins when they, famously raised their fists in protest to the way Black people were being treated and are still being treated in the United States, and how he was an ally, and a lot of people don't recognize that. I use that as a tool to kind of teach people how to be allies, and sometimes I think in all of this, and something that I've been reflecting on, I think it's so wonderful that people in media and other spheres have felt empowered to use their voice to protest against the social injustice. And at the end of the day, we can't legislate a change in people's hearts. We can change laws, and there's been so much progress, but what we're looking for is a change in people's hearts. Because so much of what's happening is not necessarily taught. There are white people that come from families that overtly teaching them to be racist, but these people are still getting caught in some way. It's not taught, but it's getting caught, and we have to recognize the historical reasons why that's been the dehumanization of Black people. And my goal and my objective is to help people to see. I feel like I'm always talking to allies in this, because Black people, we're already there. We already understand these things. I think we have these conversations all the time. The only difference is that in the past couple of weeks we've been able to have them publicly in front of white audiences. But these are things that we talk about with our family, with our Black friends all the time. So I always feel like I'm always out there trying to bring understanding, and also doing it in a way that's kind of seasoned with grace, because most of the people that I know, white people that I know, they are really, I think, well-intentioned people that want to understand, that want to learn, that want to grow, just really weren't aware of so many different things. And so if I can use sport to bring awareness and understanding, and also tell the stories of Black people and other people of color, other athletes of color, in from a lens that is not white supremacist. It will change the way that we see stories, the way that we tell stories, and will help to shape the ideology and the narrative around race in North America. I think that's ultimately my hope. I know it's like this one little YouTube channel, and I'm one person, but I think within my sphere of influence, and I'm believing that will continue to grow and grow and grow. That my hope is just to make a real impact in that area.
Well, you've definitely done that part. But I've got to ask you, you did an episode about Michael Jordan. Do you think he could have done more during the time that he was an athlete, before the internet and social media, and that would have greatly influenced his standing for social justice? Or do you think it's a better late than never situation with him?
Yeah, I think it's always better late than never. As long as you are alive and there's air in your lungs, you have an opportunity to kind of I don't say make things right, but do your best to kind of right the wrongs of your past, you know. But yes, I would definitely say that the influence and the level of clout that Michael Jordan carried as the most recognized, one of the most recognizable men, not black men, but men, period, in the world in the 90s. If he had done even a little bit, you know, it would have been meant so much, and it could have done so much for the black community. But instead, he chose neutrality, and that's, I think, the painful part of his legacy at the top of his career. Obviously, he still very much has a lot of influence. He's still a name. He still is making an impact. Michael C. Rodin said it so beautifully in $40 Million Slaves. He said that and I think I'm probably going to mess it up, but the gist of it was that the power of Jordan's legacy is everything that he accomplished, but the tragedy of his legacy is everything that he could have, you know. And when kids were shooting each other over his shoes, I think he missed a great opportunity there to, you know, say, you know, you want to be like, I don't know what he could have done, but you want to be like Mike wouldn't do that. And just, they would have hurt him, I believe. And then followed that up with, you know, putting his money where his mouth is and investing in communities, investing in black and disadvantaged communities, and coming through and showing your face and showing support and showing them that they matter and that they don't have to do this, they don't have to live this way. Or even there's been so many other things, the sweatshops, and right into his lap, and he really did nothing with it to, as a person of influence, to speak out against what's wrong, you know, and provide a specific inspiration. But at that time, as I mentioned earlier in our interview, the generation after the civil rights movement was very, very apolitical. Michael Jordan's agent, David Falk, in an interview talked about that Michael Jordan was raised to be colorblind. His parents raised him that way. Sometimes we get the impression that he was being coached to be apolitical just for, you know, to protect the brand. And David Falk said that's not true. That was him. You know, he was just an apolitical guy. I never had to tell him how to say anything. He just wasn't political. And part of that, as I mentioned in the episode that you're referring to, it had to do with the way desegregation was handled in the United States. So when schools started to allow, when the white colleges in the States started to allow black athletes, started to integrate rather, only black athletes were integrated into these white institutions. So black coaches and that sort of thing were not. So it was an incomplete integration. And so these white institutions had the pick of the you know, of the best of black athletes, but they didn't have the responsibility to ensure that there were black people in leadership roles in those institutions. And that's on us and on them, you know. And then, because we didn't demand that. And then, furthermore, going to these universities removed the black athlete from black communities. So you have an athlete that's growing up in this community, and at a very young age, they're kind of whisked into this white world, and they're being, you know, they're being, you know, getting financial, they're taking care of the tuitions, being taken care of, and all of this kind of thing. And it distanced them from the black community, and in doing so distanced them from issues within the black community, because they're kind of whisked down this conveyor belt to success. And that's essentially what happened with Michael Jordan. He was whisked down this conveyor belt to superstardom. And so for him not to incredibly indignant about the issues in the black community is, when you think about it like that, it really isn't surprising, especially because after the civil rights movement, there was that whole generation had this mentality like, anything that you want to do if you're a Black person, there's no limits that you can do it. And to some degree, that's true, but there's still very much institutionalized systems and mindsets that are still plaguing America. As we can see, we're seeing that so much hasn't changed, but I feel like that generation didn't really understand that. They were so removed from what was happening in Black communities that they kind of saw themselves as kind of like proof that like there's no limits that you can to doing anything, when in the reality Black people are still disproportionately represented amongst all the bad categories in the United States and in Canada as well. So it was, I think what's happening right now, I can't speak for Michael Jordan, but I think that as an older gentleman, and he's not that old, I think he's 50 something or whatever, but he's had time to kind of reflect and look back, and also seeing the way athletes like LeBron James in particular have handled it, and how LeBron James has been very vocal about righting the wrongs of the Jordan generation in terms of them not speaking up when it was so important to it. And so LeBron James has been so unapologetically on the ball when it comes to those things, and he's just somebody who just hasn't dropped the ball, it seems like, at all, and really just showing how it can be done, how an athlete with incredible clout and influence can use their platform to really, really implement social change, and that's incredible. And I think that Michael Jordan's in a place where he's able to look back on that and look back on his career and look at all the issues and kind of think like, wow, like I could have done so much. And so seeing him come forward now and using personal language as well and saying us and we as Black people, it was, for me, that was really telling, because you've never really heard Michael Jordan talk like that. He's so apolitical, and he seemed to almost had in that O.J. Simpson type of way transcended race, and was living in a certain space where it's like, okay, well, I'm not Black, I'm Michael Jordan. He didn't say that. I'm just quoting O.J. Simpson. Yeah. But he was living in that kind of world. So for him to use personal language and talk about being, even mention being a Black man, for me, I was taken aback, and I thought, wow, I think he's really in a place where he's been able to reflect, and that, it's not too late. Like, he's, relatively speaking, a young person and can have such a great impact on the Black community and all communities. And he has the notoriety and the clout, maybe not in the same way that he did in the 90s, but he still has that in a lot of ways, and can still make an impact. So it's something that I'm very pleased to see. And we also just have to have grace for people, like we're all growing and we're all developing, and we have every right to hold each other to account. But I think that having grace for each other is important, and trying to understand people's perspective and their journey is important. And that's why I chose to do that piece in color commentary, because I think that a lot of people just don't understand why Michael Jordan didn't say anything ever, and I wanted to help people to understand the journey of segregation and how that separated the athletes from the Black communities, and how they were whisked down this conveyor belt to success. And it changed the way that they felt connected to the Black community. So it's no surprise how we've seen them, kind of take this apolitical stance. But William C. Rodin talks about that a lot in his book, $40 Million Slaves, which I think, like I've mentioned, but it's when I read that book, it was just so incredible and life-changing for me in terms of just seeing another journalist that was interested in the same issues that I was. He talks about that a lot, and other authors as well. So I definitely want to bring that to light.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, never too late for change. And you made up a good point, just giving everybody grace and giving opportunity to just change and to grow, because we're all still growing in life. And speaking of an athlete that was ever growing and ever changing, and unfortunately we didn't get a chance to see his full change and continue to change, was a gentleman by the name of Kobe Bryant. Did you have opportunity to meet Kobe, or did you have opportunity to maybe cover Kobe during his time playing with the Lakers and coming to Toronto, or if you have any Kobe stories you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, I wish I had met Kobe Bryant. That would have been incredible, but I didn't, unfortunately. And he retired in 2018. That's right? So I wasn't covering basketball or anything at that time. But Kobe was a huge part of my childhood. He was the athlete of our generation. And I think of celebrity deaths, and the death of Kobe Bryant was probably the most personal, or one of the most personal for me. I didn't even feel like I could post anything about it for a long time, just because he just always had been there. He'd always been around. He was drafted. When he was drafted, he was 17 years old, going on 18, and we saw him grow from a kid into the greatest player. One of the greatest players, arguably one of the greatest. Not arguably, but he's definitely one of the greatest players. But I know people used to argue about him being better than Michael Jordan. But I think we've handled that in at least recent months. But so it was really difficult for me. But one of the biggest things that came out of that, especially concerning his legacy, was his role as a father and as a champion for women's sport, particularly basketball and tennis, and the symbolism of him, dying with his daughter on the way, and other athletes on the way to a basketball tournament, I think is just so symbolic of the person that he was, and his investment in the women's basketball movement. So many people, particularly after he passed, I heard quite a few people say, it's too bad, he never had a son, and his legacy won't go on. And I was just like, that's not Kobe at all, And he never. What strikes me about him is he never saw not having a son as some sort of, putting an asterisk on his legacy. You know what I mean? He of course, the hashtag Girl Dad has gained incredible popularity because of him, because he was so impassioned for his daughters and supported his daughter Gigi's journey in basketball, in sport, and I have no doubt that they would have continued to make an incredible impact. But I think that even, all things work together for good. I believe that firmly. And even though he's passed, I think that the legacy and the way things kind of went down, I think it's going to maybe even have an even more powerful legacy on women's basketball and women's sport. He also, of course, is a huge champion for women's tennis, and had actually wrote a book for his daughters that looked at tennis. But I think what book for his daughter? She wrote it for his daughter. It was a public book that you can buy on Amazon or whatever. But it was intended for his. That was his motivation, was to write a book for his daughters to feel represented and seen. But he's just been great, and I'm excited to see what his impact will do to women's sports. And I love to see the way his funeral and the way his memorial was conducted, and how there were so many players, female players, and men and women that were able to speak to him and speak of him and his legacy. And so much of that was just his legacy as a father. And I think that was just a powerful image to men everywhere. It's always interesting to me with this generation, also, especially with Obama and all of that, and the symbolism of that family in the White House. It's like there's no excuse for not being a good dad. In this generation, it's like it's cool to be a good dad. And I think that Kobe Bryant's legacy definitely reinforced that for a lot of people, because he was a hero to so many, and that's I'm very intrigued to see how his legacy plays out in coming years, and maybe the awards and the facilities or whatever that continue to be established in his name and the legacy of him and his daughter. I think it's going to be incredible, and continue. I think he'll continue to have an incredible legacy on sport and women's sport in particular.
Rightfully so, and long live the Black Mamba. Wendy Ann, thank you so much for being on the program. But before we let you go, can you let the audience know where they can find you on social media or any websites you want to direct them to for your articles? Let them know that as well.
Okay, so I am Wendy Ann Runs, so WENDYANN Runs on social media. So that's on Instagram and Twitter as well. I have my channel is called Color Commentary. So color spelled Canadian style, COLOUR commentary. You can find that on YouTube and follow me there. And your support is amazing on this journey, and it's just encouraging, and the feedback that I've gotten so far has just been tremendous, and it encourages me that I'm on the right direction, in the right path. And so you can find me there, and definitely feel free to email me and touch base, and we can have a conversation as well if that's something you want. So Wendy Ann Runs and Color Commentary.
Well, you heard it from her. She's Wendy Ann Clark. She is a multimedia journalist, and she also has her YouTube channel, as she mentioned earlier, called Color Commentary. Check it out. Wendy Ann, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. This was wonderful, and taking time out of your schedule to be with us on the program.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been tremendous.
It was.
Thank you for all the good
likewise.
work that you're doing. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and you continue the great work you're doing as well.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the channel. Remember to click like, share, and subscribe, and thank you for watching.